What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9, and today we have a video with some kind of less usual deck combinations. So I am playing a Jyn Urso Double Cunning deck, and I am playing against a Blue Thrawn deck here from Jrod. So these are not the decks that are necessarily tearing up the competitive scene right now, but I think they are interesting. I think they are interesting in I think they're interesting in their own right, and we're gonna see how it goes. So this time we're gonna lead off with a Lothal Insurgent. This can be a good unit with Iden because or with Jyn because her ability allows it to win against a 2/3 and remain alive. My opponent plays the Smuggler there. I think it's Daring Smuggler or something like that. I use Jin's ability to attack into it and reduce its power by 1, allowing me to remove the shield without being defeated and putting me in a potentially good position for a second fight with those two units. Um, so Jin's ability there, action, attack with a unit, the defender gets -1 power for this attack. So this is an ability that can allow you to it allows you to have more efficient unit conflict. Sometimes a fight that would have been a trade with another leader turns into a scenario where you can defeat them and remain alive. Sometimes sometimes an attack can be a scenario where you're going to attack them and you're just going to take a bit less damage and be in a position where you're harder to defeat in the future. In this case, I used it to clear that shield while remaining alive, and we'll see what my opponent does in response. Jrod ends up playing an entrenched on that smuggler. I will go ahead and play the Millennium Falcon, 3 cost 3/4 that comes into play ready. The downside is that you do have to pay one or return it to the owner's hand when you ready cards during the regroup phase. So it's really good when initially played, but there is a bit of a downside in terms of that upkeep cost. My opponent then uses the security complex to give a shield to the buffed smuggler and swings in to clear out the Lothal Insurgent without taking damage thanks to that additional shield. So my opponent has now used the base, and we're going to have to think about what to do next in this scenario. I'm going to pay 1 to keep my Falcon in play, and swing it into the enemy base for another 3 damage. In this matchup, I'm kind of thinking that I'm probably the beatdown in this matchup, so I'm thinking about sort of playing that way. My opponent plays Del Miko, a 3 cost 3/3 with Restore 1, and he makes my events cost 1 more resource. Pretty strong and relatively newly previewed card. I have some gameplay earlier where I was using him with Iden, but he seems a good fit for this Blue Thrawn deck as well. That ability to impede your opponent's events is just a nice little way to mess up their turn. And at the same time, you have that situation where 3 cost 3/3, a little bit below curve. You do have that restore though. It's not terrible. So my opponent ends up attacking into my smuggler with the buffed smuggler, taking 2 damage, but getting the shield token removed from my unit. So I end up resourcing this Fleet Lieutenant. Under some different circumstances, a Fleet Lieutenant would actually be really good here. But the problem with the Fleet Lieutenant is that the problem with a Fleet Lieutenant here is that the units that I have on the field aren't rebels. So I have the Daring Smuggler and Millennium Falcon are both underworld units and don't benefit from the buff from that Fleet Lieutenant. So I end up playing a shoot first here and using it to take out Del Miko, while keeping my smuggler on the board. The reason that I went for Del Miko is because this way, with his event tax removed, I can maybe surprise strike the base with the Falcon. However, my opponent ends up playing a Vanquish to take out the Falcon, then has the buffed smuggler defeat my smuggler. So at this point in the game, I feel like I'm actually a fair bit behind. So I have done 6 damage to the base, and we're even on cards, and my opponent has used their base while I have not. But I have not managed to deal a lot of damage early on, and as the more aggressive player, I would like to be doing more. So I play Leia Defiant Princess, use her ability to exhaust that buffed Daring Smuggler. This way I am hoping to get Jyn onto the field without having that smuggler poised to defeat her. My opponent plays a Imperial Death Trooper and deals 2 damage to itself and 2 damage to Leia, clearing her off the board. I'm going to go ahead and deploy Jyn. My opponent brings out Thrawn. So Thrawn deploys as a 3/9, kind of a surprisingly high stat line there for someone who's not necessarily what you'd think of as a frontline character. And Jyn, on the other hand, is a 4/7, but she now has a passive version of the ability that I used earlier. So that ability to attack while debuffing the opponent, Jyn has that, but even stronger. So her version is her version as a unit is actually a passive that applies to all attacks you might make. You don't have to do it as a special action. So I'm thinking about what to do here. So one thing I could do is use Cunning. I could exhaust Thrawn. Um, I end up deciding I'm just going to swing on in for 4 damage to the base. I'm trying to push damage to base here. I don't think that I've done enough early on, but maybe I can delay my opponent with Cunning and stuff and get into a position where I'll be more able to do that. My opponent has Thrawn hit Jyn. In this situation, one thing that I could do is deploy Ezra, but another thing that I could do is actually just take the initiative here, which would mean that my opponent would then not be able to take out Jyn as the first action. And if I do that, I can have Jyn attack into Thrawn or attack into the Death Trooper and remain alive and potentially get some results. My opponent plays Boba Disintegrator, which I don't love to see. So I have a Fleet Lieutenant here. With the Fleet Lieutenant, I could have Jyn defeat Thrawn and remain alive, but she could then be defeated without taking any damage. She could then be defeated by Boba Fett without Boba actually taking any damage, because the on-attack ability of Boba Disintegrator to deal damage to the enemy, to deal damage to the target of your attack, if they are exhausted and did not interplay this turn, would be able to defeat Jyn at that time. So I'm sort of thinking about how best to work this, thinking about my resource options as well. My opponent has a substantially stronger board than me, as you can see. So I need to figure something out that's going to be positive for my need to figure something out that's going to be positive for my overall board state. I could surprise strike the base, which would do a nice clean 7 damage, but I don't really have a good follow-up. If I had more stuff in space, that might actually be a good thing to do with Jyn and just try to get into that situation where you're pushing for the last few points of damage, but doesn't really seem like I have enough. I need to try and get some more board stability instead. So what I end up doing here, so I can play Cunning here, and what I choose to do is exhaust Thrawn, exhaust the Smuggler, and return Boba Disintegrator to hand. My opponent unfortunately has a shoot first to allow the Death Trooper to not only defeat Jyn but also remain alive. That is a very unfortunate development for me. I was hoping that waylay was going to allow me to take over was going to allow me to kind of negate my opponent's options this turn, have Jyn then use the Fleet Lieutenant to take out Thrawn, and while remaining safe from major retaliation, or maybe the opponent could then go in with the Death Trooper and trade, but that would still be, in my opinion, good value. I'd have that Fleet Lieutenant on the field. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be. That shoot first was very effective from my opponent, and I'm in kind of a tough spot, quite frankly. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So I am going to bring in Han, clearing out that buffed smuggler. My opponent could trade both Thrawn and the Death Trooper for Han, but if that happens, maybe we're in a better state. My opponent would still have that 2/3 fighter on the board, but I would be ahead on life, and maybe we'd be able to make a comeback. My opponent swings in with the Death Trooper. I take the initiative, and then there's another shoot first, allowing Thrawn to take out Han without taking damage. And these little fighters and Boba hit the field. Now I've drawn another copy of Han, which is pretty good for me. Um, so in this situation, my opponent has a stronger board, but I'm hoping Han Solo here is going to get some good value. So he is a 6/6 with ambush, and he also has kind of a permanent shoot first going. So because of that permanent shoot first, he can take out enemy units without taking damage. In this case, he takes out Thrawn. My opponent attacks the base with Boba, and then the spacers, and then actually plays a Fet's Fire Spray, which is a really unorthodox decision to put into your deck here, since he's not actually playing Boba Fett the leader. But because he has Boba Fett the unit, it still comes into play readied. So that's an interesting little situation. I wouldn't recommend that people necessarily do that in deck building, but it really paid off here. So, maybe it's better than I thought. I played Bodhi Rook to see my opponent's hand and potentially discard a card, and unfortunately, I see that my opponent has a lot of gas. There's a Count Dooku, another Fet's Fire Spray, and at that point, I'm going to concede the game. I don't even get a discard with Bodhi Rook, and my opponent is in a position where they can probably close things out with the Space Arena. And even if I had some removal option for that Fet's Fire Spray, my opponent could just play another one. So unfortunately, I lost in the first game. It I think in the early game, I just wasn't really getting the results that I needed. I was able to push some damage with the Falcon and with Jyn when she was first deployed, but ultimately I wasn't really able to get like that much value and ended up in kind of a tough spot. I think that in this matchup, I do think that I have to kind of be the aggro deck, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to be very aggro in this first round. So we're gonna move on to the second round and see if I can do a little better. Um, So this round, I'm gonna be able to start off with the crafty smuggler. It's the crafty smuggler, I think, not the daring smuggler. And so 2/2 shielded. My opponent plays the cartel spacer, 2 cost 2/3 that exhausts a unit when deployed. If you have another cunning unit and they have a unit with, I think, 4 or less cost. I don't remember if it's 4 or less cost or 4 or less power. I think it's 4 or less cost. But in this case, there isn't another cunning unit, and I don't have something to exhaust anyway. So whatever. Okay, so going into this next turn, one thing I could do is play Ezra Bridger. Another thing that I could do is actually bring out the Millennium Falcon, which would be a more than a match for this cartel spacer. Um, and also, of course, I can attack with my crafty smuggler. Thinking about what to do here, I end up deciding that I'm going to lead off by playing the Falcon and threatening that spacer. My opponent entrenches the spacer, making it a 5/6. So with the Falcon about to die, I go ahead and swing into the enemy base. One thing that I could have done there is use Jeddah City to nerf the spacer, but I decided, you know what? My deck doesn't have very much of a space presence. I'm going to just focus on going to the ground arena this game. My opponent entrenched that unit, so it can't attack my base. It's just like sitting there defending against space. And this deck is heavily ground weighted just because there aren't that many good space units. I think I have like Alliance X-Wing, Wing Leader, and the Falcon, and that's it in the space arena with this build. So I'm not really very worried about going for more of a ground arena focus, and we're going to see how that ends up working out for me or not. Um, my opponent uses Thrawn's ability, revealing a surprise strike to exhaust my crafty smuggler. So Thrawn can look at the top card of each player's deck when the action phase starts, and can then pay 1 to reveal the top card of either player's deck and exhaust a unit that costs that much or less. So in that case, a surprise strike, which costs 2, was revealed and used to exhaust my 2-cost cartel smuggler. Okay, so my opponent has deployed Boba Disintegrator. One thing that I can do here is ambush Boba Disintegrator with the what are they called? The Syndicate Lackeys that I have in hand. Another thing that I could do is use my Surprise Strike to clear Boba Disintegrator with the Crafty Smuggler. My opponent opts to give Boba Disintegrator a shield. I'm not actually. Oh, you know what it was? It was my opponent. So I had the initiative that turn, but my opponent asked, like, "Hey, can I do this?" Because that is what I should have done at the end of the last turn, and I allowed it. So he used that security complex to get a shield. So then I traded shields instead of immediately having the what's his name? The syndicate lackeys come in and get the kill. My opponent deployed Bosk, defeating my Ezra, and then I did go for the syndicate lackey. The problem that I have in this situation is so Bosk can deal deal 2 damage to a unit when someone plays an event. Or I'm sorry, when my opponent plays an event, they can deal 2 damage to a unit. So if there is a removal event, he can actually 2-for-1 me here by using the removal on one of my units and having Bosk's ability on the other, and that's exactly what we see. A takedown to defeat one, the 2 damage from Bosk to defeat the other, and thus he gets a quite efficient little batch of removal there. So I deploy good old Jyn Urso. My opponent sends Bosk into Jyn, inflicting 4 damage. I'm going to play Bodhi Rook here. So Bodhi is a 3-cost 3/3 double cunning unit. You get to look at your opponent's hand and discard a non-unit card. However, all my opponent's cards are units, so it's not going to be very effective here. I did still develop an additional unit for my own board, but this isn't really the result that you most want when you have Bodhi Rook hit the board. So I do still have Jyn on field. She only has 3 life remaining, which means that Thrawn will be able to defeat her in one hit. My opponent deploys Thrawn. And in this situation, I decide that what I'm going to do is have Jyn actually swing into Thrawn. The reason that I do this way, Jyn, because of her ability reducing the power of units when you attack, she only takes 2 damage in retaliation, which means that she actually gets to survive with 1 HP. Then Thrawn ends up actually defeating Bodhi here, leaving him on, I believe, 2 HP. And then we see another Daring Smuggler hit the field for my opponent. Draw some wing leaders here. So I can play Han Solo, who's kind of the top end of my curve in this build and is very strong. I could use him to defeat Thrawn. I could play Cunning and do various effects. I end up deciding to use Cunning. So what I'm going to do is exhaust those 2 units and bounce the Crafty Smuggler. Um, my opponent plays a 7th Fleet Defender. I'm going to bring out a wing leader, giving Jyn +2/+2. So now she actually has 9 life, so she has 3 remaining. My opponent plays another 7th Fleet Defender, and then because my Jyn has 3 life remaining and reduces incoming damage by 1, or reduces the target's power by 1 when she attacks into Thrawn, defeats him, and remains alive at 1 HP yet again. So Jin's ability really coming in clutch here by allowing her not once but twice to endure retaliation damage that would have otherwise defeated her. And this lets her take out Thrawn and remain on the board and poised to potentially do some major damage. I can hit the enemy base for 6 with her this turn, though the space arena is starting to get out of control. Unfortunately for me, my opponent has another Imperial Death Trooper, dealing 2 damage to the Death Trooper and 2 damage to Jyn, which will defeat her since she only has 1 life remaining. This does give me an opportunity to attack with my wing leader before it gets taken out, so I'll go ahead and do that, swinging in for 2 damage to the enemy base. Wing leader not long for this world, as the Cartel Spacer and Defenders are poised to get her out of there. So I have a weird hand and end up deciding the best thing to do here is to use Han Solo, so he'll pick off the Han Solo will pick off the Death Trooper, not the most efficient ambush, but it develops a very strong unit for me. My opponent hits the base with the Defender, has the Entrenched Spacer take out my Wing Leader, and then plays two cheap units. It's another Crafty Smuggler and a copy of Del Miko there. Luckily, my opponent seems to be hitting some kind of smaller stuff and not the big units that might be more impactful at this phase in the game. I am going to try to. The space situation is not good, but I'm going to try and get some damage in here. I have also drawn the Cantina Bouncer, who could be very useful in this situation, sending a unit back to hand, just stalling my opponent some more, and potentially getting some solid value as a unit as well. So I decide I'm going to lead off. I have Han attack, but I'm not going for the units at this point. I'm actually just trying to do damage to the base. So the reason for this is simply that I think that at this point in the game, I'm going to do best by trying to attack and clear the enemy base before the opponent gets this space stuff to overwhelm me. So I feel like the opponent is advantaged enough in space that what I need to do is use the ground to push damage. I play the Cantina Bouncer. When played, you may return a non-leader unit to the opponent's hand. My opponent brings out another Entrenched, this time on the Crafty Smuggler, but I hit Jeddah City to debuff that unit down to 1 damage. The other Defender hits me there. I'm going to bring out another Crafty Smuggler of my own. My opponent plays the third 7th Fleet Defender. All 3 copies of 7th Fleet Defender in my opponent's build now out there in the space arena, so that arena is pretty negative for me. And then my opponent also replays Del Miko. And so now my 13 light damage done, so 12 remaining for my opponent, 13 remaining for me. What I want to do here is focus on getting damage in. I do have another copy of Cunning, which can potentially really slow down my opponent. And I have some shoot firsts. I have a surprise strike. My opponent is poised to deal quite a bit of damage, but the Cunning that I have here, I have to pay it for 1 more. So I return the Crafty Smuggler to hand, causing that Entrenched to fall off. And then I exhaust up to 2 units. So I exhaust Del and I exhaust one of my opponent's defenders. My opponent now, thanks to that move, is going to be in a substantially worse spot. That Cunning card just offers great tempo. The potential to exhaust 2 units and bounce a 3rd unit is just really a lot of disruption. And so in this situation, now my opponent still has the 2 7th Fleet Defenders and the Entrenched Spacer from very early in the game. But with my focus on the ground arena, I'm hoping that I can push through and close things out here. The Del Miko that's in play does mean that my next event will also cost 1 more, but I can still play the Surprise Strike for an additional 3 damage. And I have Han to deal 6, the Cantina Bouncer to deal 3, and potentially the Daring Smuggler to deal another 2. So that would be 11 damage, which would just miss lethal. But if I play the Surprise Strike or either of the shoot firsts that I have in hand, that could give me enough damage to make up for it. So we'll have to see how exactly it goes. But in this situation, I'm feeling pretty optimistic. So we have a 7th Fleet Defender swing in for 3. I'm going to go ahead and take the swing with Han, dealing 6 damage. My opponent brings out an Academy Defense Walker. So the Academy Defense Walker is a 5/5 and has Sentinel and gives an experience token to damaged units on your side when you play it. So I have the Crafty Smuggler deal 2 damage to the Walker, attacking and losing his shield but remaining alive. This other Defender swings into me. I then make a bit of a misplay, so I use the shoot first to have my Cantina Bouncer defeat the Academy Defense Walker without taking damage. I think in retrospect it would have been better for me to use Jyn's ability in that situation. So Jyn's ability could be used to attack in and take 4 damage in return, which would leave the Cantina Bouncer still on the field and would also mean that I would still have that shoot first in hand if it's needed later. kind of a minor thing as the game is very close to ending, and I think it's relatively unlikely that I would have been able to use it again later. But it is a situation where I might have been able to save that card and resource under other circumstances. My opponent leads off with Del Miko taking out the Crafty Smuggler and healing the base for 1. By healing the base for 1, he goes out of range of an immediate attack from Han Solo, but I have the surprise strike to hit the base a little harder with Han and ultimately get the win. I think in that game, I was able to do well thanks to Cunning. The double aspect card had crucial disruption for my opponent. But additionally, I feel like I got a little lucky in some ways because Jrod was drawing so many like mid-cost units and not the like more expensive stuff that he needed. We saw all those Seventh Fleet defenders and we saw smugglers and Dell and stuff like that, but not some of the bigger and more impactful cards, not a Vanquish to take out Han. It wasn't really, I think, what my opponent needed in this situation, and it ended up allowing me to get the win. So we are now going to go to a game 3, and let's see how this one goes. So we are currently 1-1 with the Double Cunning Jyn versus Vigilance Thrawn. Bit of a bit of a less orthodox matchup, but interesting to see some other stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and resource. I think this game I'm going to try to. I'm thinking about what to do, and I'm thinking that in this game I may try and push some early aggression in space. We'll have to see exactly what happens, so I can potentially play out that Lothal Insurgent if my opponent has a space start. We see a Scout Bike Pursuer, 2-cost 1/4 with Grit. So I am going to go for the space plan, I think, that I was discussing earlier. I play an Alliance X-Wing, 2-cost 2/3. Now, the problem with this is I don't actually have as many space cards as some other decks. So I don't have aggression, for instance, so I'm not running the Green Squadron A-Wing. But because I have the X-Wing and Wing Leader in my opening hand, that's going to be kind of what I go for here. So I have the X-Wing. My opponent exhausts it, revealing my top card, which is a Fleet Lieutenant. I'm going to go ahead and play a Wing Leader buffing the X-Wing. Unfortunately, Thrawn's exhaust means I'm not going to get that much value out of this turn at least. But I know that the next card that I draw is going to be that Fleet Lieutenant that was revealed by Thrawn, and I'll be able to swing in for a big chunk of damage there. Um, However, that's a case where Thrawn's ability can be quite useful. My opponent was going to play a 2-drop unit, and so having that 1 resource to use Thrawn's ability saved him, 2 damage base, but actually would have been 4 damage thanks to the Wing Leader. And my opponent then played a Viper Probe Droid. I'm going to play that Fleet Lieutenant and swing in for the big 6 damage hit that I mentioned earlier. That feels pretty good to be swinging in for that much damage already. My opponent plays a Takedown to clear out the X-Wing after it's attacked. I'm going to go ahead and swing in for 2 more damage with the Wing Leader. So this is, right now, I'm feeling pretty good about this. This is a good aggressive start. And I am thinking that I'm more the like aggro in this matchup and want to push and close things out quickly. If at all possible, use those cunning cards for disruption and bonus damage and so on. My opponent trades the probe droid for the Fleet Lieutenant and then hits my base for 1 with the Biker Scout. I've drawn another surprise strike. So this is an interesting situation. You normally really don't want to resource surprise strike. It's one of the most aggro cards. There is an argument that I should resource it here, though, and instead play Lothal Insurgent and Alliance X-Wing. But I decide, no, we're going to hang on to it. I'm going to resource the Insurgent, and I'm going to actually surprise strike and then play the X-Wing, just keeping my space focus. So the surprise strike lands for 5 damage to the enemy base, 12 life remaining for my opponent. I am really pushing to try and close things out. And let's see what happens here. I have that Cunning in hand also, which can do some nice bonus damage. I play out another Alliance X-Wing. So yeah, I'm really space focused right now, and hoping that I can use that space arena to get the advantage. My opponent plays Bosk. I'm gonna just go ahead and draw. I don't love my opponent having Bosk. It does mean that any event that my opponent plays could kill that Wing Leader, for instance. Not what I really most want to see. I'm going to have to resource something, and then this turn what I'm probably going to try to do is push even more damage. So I resource the Lothal Insurgent, who I don't think will live very long. I'm going to try to push even more damage and get Jyn on the field to maybe close things out. We'll have to see. Um, I'll lead off here. I think I lead off with an attack from the wing leader. Yeah, I lead off with an attack from the wing leader because the wing leader is poised to be removed if my opponent plays any event with Bosk. And so indeed we see another double removal, the takedown played there to defeat the X-Wing, and then Bosk's ability to clear the wing leader. Not something that I really like to see at all. And I have a cunning in hand. I have a surprise strike. I have a shoot first. So if I use the cunning and do the +4 attack mode, Jyn will go up to 8 attack, and I can then also do the surprise strike to potentially do 11 damage and win the game in one hit. I used Jedha City on Bosk to debuff him because I'm worried that a surprise strike could immediately kill Jyn otherwise. My opponent uses the security complex to shield Bosk. So my opponent has 2 resources. So this is the problem. There are a lot of 2 resource cards that could exhaust me. So we could see no Good to Me Dead, Asteroid Sanctuary. There are a lot of potential things my opponent could have that would negate Jyn for this turn. And if I go big to try to get that damage from Cunning and then it gets negated, I might actually just lose. However, I decide that I have to push for it. So I'm going to use Cunning to exhaust the 2 units that my opponent has that can still do damage to attack. And give Jyn +4. So unfortunately, my opponent then plays an entrenched on Jyn. So if there weren't this entrenched, Jyn would be able to actually just win the game with the surprise strike that I have in hand. But thanks to the entrenched, I can't attack the enemy base. On the other hand, I do still have that +4, which I'm able to use to remove Thrawn in one hit, only taking 2 damage in retaliation thanks to Jyn's ability. So my big play to end the game early was unfortunately countered here. And what I now have to do is try and use the entrenched that my opponent gave me to get a bunch of value with Jyn and gain control of the situation. Unfortunately, that Bosk is shielded by the security complex, which is kind of a big problem for me, quite frankly. I would love to have Jyn defeat Bosk, but it's not going to be immediately available. And my opponent actually uses a surprise strike with Bosk to defeat Jyn, even though she has that entrenched. So that attack will deal 7 damage, which would leave Jyn alive on 1 life. But the 2 damage from Bosk then closes it. And unfortunately, I have to take the initiative because I have really only drawn I've only drawn combat tricks and I didn't have a unit to use them on there. So it's really grim, unfortunately. I've missed that turn completely and I can just sort of feel my tempo draining away here. Um I'm not in a very good spot right now. I play the Cantina Bouncer and Bounce Bosk, which isn't great, but is better than nothing. Unfortunately, this sets up my opponent to attack in with the scout bike, deal 1 damage, then can ambush that guy and clear him out with Bosk. So one thing that I could do here is play Snapshot Reflexes. I could also play Ezra. I end up just taking the initiative. I'm not actually entirely sure why. I don't think that was great. So if I play Snapshot Reflexes, it doesn't allow me to attack, but it does mean that if Bosk attacks into me, or no, it would be off by 1. So it wouldn't actually help, but it would save me from being defeated. It wouldn't defeat Bosk, but it would save me from being defeated in 1 hit. If I play Ezra, it just develops my board a little more. I'm not sure why I took the initiative there. I actually think that was a big mistake. So I now play Ezra, but it would have been a lot better to have him in play already this turn. I'm not sure what I was thinking by taking the initiative there, and I think it is proving to be very negative, quite frankly. And again, I just don't really have a ton to do. I play Leia Defiant Princess and Exhaust Bosk. This highly buffed scout bike is now able to attack in for 5 damage to my base. I'm going to take the initiative. I can have Ezra attack and remove the so I could have Ezra attack and remove the Academy Defense Walker. I could also actually surprise strike it. I have a few options, but my momentum has sort of stalled here, and I am struggling to get back in the game and maybe get in and push damage. The opponent has only 10 life remaining, but or 10 HP on the base is what it's called in this game. But it's a tough situation because I think after Jyn was countered, I really ended up losing steam. So in that scenario, I end up doing a surprise strike to hit the Academy Defense Walker and clear it. Um, with Leia Defiant Princess, I still have some other options available. Unfortunately, my opponent plays Count Dooku, and so Count Dooku is a 5/4 with shielded, and when played, defeat a unit with 3 or less, or with 4 or less remaining HP. I play Bodhi and see a handful of removal with a takedown, a vanquish, and an entrenched. End up removing the vanquish, as that's probably the most dangerous of the potential options. My opponent hits my base for 5 with Bosk. I deploy a crafty smuggler, and my opponent then hits the base for another 5 with that scout bike. So I'm in big trouble, and I just keep drawing small stuff. Another snapshot reflexes, which I really don't love seeing here. And with that, I'm actually going to concede the game. My opponent has gotten the win. So that was an interesting one in that I was, one action away from winning the game with Jyn, but my opponent had the quite relevant entrenched on my Jyn to counter there, which ended up in conjunction with me just not drawing units to play on that next turn. It ended up basically taking me out of the game. And I do think in that game, I perhaps got a little unlucky in just not seeing my units. This deck doesn't have some huge event skew or whatever. I think it has, I don't know, I think I have like 30, like somewhere in the like 33 to 36 unit range, which is fairly normal. But for whatever reason, that time I was seeing a lot of small stuff in combat tricks and not the units I needed in that mid game. But, you know, shout out to my opponent Jrod there for accurately realizing that he needed to counter Jyn and using that entrenched on my side instead of on his side. If he had entrenched one of his own units to try and just like get board control after I attack, I would have been able to surprise strike the base and win the game. But as it stood, playing it on Jyn instead was what he needed to do in order to stabilize and ultimately come back and win. So congrats to Jrod. He won this set 2-1. Some thoughts on these decks. I don't think these are the best decks in the game. I was finding that with my Cunning Jyn felt, I don't know, it didn't feel terrible. So like the double cunning stuff can be really good. That card Cunning itself is really powerful. Del Miko can be really good as well. The Cantina Bouncer is a lot of value later in the game, but the problem that I was having was it didn't quite feel that I had enough to like push through and really do the like aggro damage that I wanted. Jin's ability is kind of anti-synergistic with this also. She's wants you to be having unit clashes. So if I'm in the role of the aggressor, it ends up not really being to my liking necessarily because I'm not getting value out of that leader ability as opposed to someone like Sabine who can be doing damage to the base directly. Um, so I was sort of thinking this would end up being like a mid-range deck. In this matchup, I ended up having to play it a little bit more aggro, I think, and it's possible that I want to make some changes to go more in a mid-range direction, and kind of trying to have things come together like that. Right now, it felt like a lot of the cards were good, but it didn't necessarily feel like they were really working well together and creating a situation where it all came together with a really coherent game plan. It felt more like a good stuff type deck where you're just playing cards that are effective and there isn't as much of a overall plan. I do think Jyn is going to be a really powerful deck for limited because in limited play, she has her ability to just get those trades and unit engagements going more efficiently with her leader ability is, I think, going to be very valuable. Um, as it stands, I think that with this deck, I either want to be more aggro, maybe bringing in more aggression stuff, or I want to maybe go further in a more mid-range direction. Maybe replace the snapshot reflexes with something like Waylay. I think that's actually a change that I've already made and look more at some stuff like that. The other thing that I don't like about the double yellow specification is that it really lacks space units. That's something that's really really missing in this composition. So I could play it as yellow red and go more aggro. The problem that also adds some good space units. You can play red 3. You can play Green Squadron A-Wing, you can play Disabling Fang Fighter, you can play Star Wing Scouts. There's a lot of stuff you can potentially add in space if you go for red. The problem is that I'm then in this situation of like, well, if this is what I'm doing, why would I be doing it in Jyn and not Sabine? So the like aggro yellow red rebel deck is a good deck, but I think Sabine does it better because Sabine is very well suited to an aggro game plan. So if I were to do something like that in Jyn, the question would be, how is Jin's ability helping me, and how am I taking advantage of that? Like, what can I do there to get more value? And I'm not quite seeing it at present. It's very possible that it's there, and someone in the comments can maybe add some stuff. I do think that in the situation where your opponent is playing sentinels and stuff that you have to kind of contend with and fight, Jin's ability can be very useful in that situation. Similarly, the Lothal Insurgent, as a 3/2 is kind of vulnerable to the opponent playing a 2/3 or whatever and trading. Jin's ability allows you to make that trade a positive by reducing their attack when you come in, if you have the initiative to make that a first attack, of course. So those things could be useful, but I currently think Sabine's ability is more useful in that style. However, maybe the Jyn version of the deck would be a little slower, but more able to shift game plans and play as the more control-oriented deck, maybe in a mirror between the aggro builds or similar. I'd have to think about it a bit more, but right now at least, I think Jyn is like solid, and I think she's fun, but I would not put her in the A tier. I think she's more of a B tier leader right now, but it remains to be seen what other synergies she'll get, and I do think she's going to be really strong and limited. Okay. Thrawn also, which my opponent was using. I think Thrawn is actually pretty good. The problem with Thrawn is just that he's not Boba, and Boba is really good. Um, so Thrawn has some good control elements. You don't always want to be using his ability. It is bad on tempo, but the ability to exhaust a unit, especially a cheap unit, can be really effective if the opponent has a fallen lightsaber start on a cheap unit, or goes for a wing leader buff. Something like that. There are a lot of kind of upgrade focused strategies sometimes where they're going to really buff up an early unit, and Thrawn's ability is very good at dealing with that. My opponent, Jrod, mentioned having a problem this game, which was that um, Thrawn, he had a lot of smaller units to kind of defend against aggro and so on, which I think is a good strategy. But the problem with doing that is that it has anti-synergy with Thrawn's ability, because his ability is based on the cost of the thing that you reveal. So if you have higher cost stuff, you're going to be in a better spot to exhaust larger units. But at the same time, that might not be what like fits the like most that might not be what fits the most smoothly into your overall cost curve and like style of play. That is a bit of an issue. Overall, I do think Thrawn is good. He's more control oriented than Boba. Boba just offers a lot of value right now that I think it's somewhat difficult for Thrawn to deal with. Um, it'll be interesting to see how things develop with Thrawn. I do think there's a good chance that he'll be quite strong at some point. Having that information about what cards your opponent is drawing is also potentially very valuable in terms of just allowing you to make better plays, play around stuff. So I do think there are some options there, and right now it isn't even really so much that I think Thrawn is bad, as much that I think he's just overshadowed by Boba in the same color. But we'll have to see where that goes as things develop. We see more cards revealed, and we do some more deck building. Anyway, that's going to do it for this one, guys. Hope you enjoyed seeing some leaders that are not necessarily played as commonly. And yeah, we'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I have my Jyn deck list linked in the video description below, and I will catch you guys later. Thanks for watching.